Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and my wildcard is active and has been active all week and is almost completely locked in. I'm just firming up a couple of final spots pending some injury updates which we'll need from the press conferences overnight tonight. We're going to very quickly cover off a game week 34 as I scored 102 points, receiving a small green arrow of 9k in the positive. But then we'll spend most of the time discussing my wildcard team, which, if that is what you're here for, feel free to skip forward to that section with the chapters below. But before we jump into it, remember to give this a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, especially if you get any value out of the following content. Right, so game week 34. Free hitters did quite well this week. I was actually very close to doing extremely well, as if you caught the last video last week before the deadline. I was flirting with the idea of taking a hit to sell Semenyo for Mateta and was going to do that if the flag for Semenyo wasn't removed. But Semenyo's red flag was removed on Saturday morning, a full 12 hours or so before the deadline, which I was absolutely stoked with, as it meant I didn't need to buy Mateta, as I had not yet cast my eyes over his gameplay, and it meant that I did not need to take a hit for the game week. And, well, I wish that flag had have remained, because switching across to Mateta would have been a 15-point swing in my favour after the hit was accounted for, and with Semenyo scoring a goal and earning 10 points for the double game week. What a crazy rank swing decision, with Mateta pulling away with 29 points from the game week. Oh, if that flag had remained, it would have been so much better. But I bought in Eze for Son, which was a pretty standard move, and Eze repaid me with 14 points across the double. And I also bought in Trent Alexander-Arnold to become an additional differential in my squad alongside Odegaard and Semenyo. Of course, Alexander-Arnold scored that free kick in the first fixture, earning himself a 10-pointer across the double game week as well. My other differential in the squad was Odegaard. So Odegaard versus Havertz versus Saliba came out second best behind Havertz, who actually did quite well across the double. Can't remember the exact score that he got, but Odegaard had been in my squad for a while. It was looking pretty good, but not owning Mateta, Elise, and Foden all hauling big, it dented my rank gains quite severely. I think I was up to about 130k at one point, but then all those points rolled in and I tumbled back down the rankings. Still, it's a green arrow and I can't complain too much, as there were some pretty bang average scores floating about the place out there, with a lot of managers losing ground on their rank. So pretty happy, 102 points. I got Dan Burn off the bench for his 1-pointer for Haaland missing out, and that is pretty much all she wrote. So, on to the wildcard team. Right. So a couple of key bits of information if you missed my video earlier this week. So I activated my wildcard straight away, and fair play. I can't remember exactly who that was in the comments, but someone said I should have not clicked the wildcard button until the end of the week so that all of my transfers are accounted towards price swings, and that's actually a very good point. I probably should have considered that a little bit more. Not that one manager making that difference is actually going to affect the ranks too much, but if everyone did that, then yes, the prices on the players would fluctuate quite a lot more heavily. But anyway, a couple of the key points from my notes from the earlier videos. I'm avoiding United entirely for the rest of the season. Yes, Bruno Fernandes has been returning quite consistently over the last few weeks, but the types of goals that he is scoring, I don't think they are sustainable across the remaining games. They've got a great fixture against Burnley, which probably looks pretty good. They did all right against Sheffield United, but Fernandes' goal on his weak foot from miles out, he always is shooting from that far out, but having watched 34 weeks of United play across the season, the injuries that they've got, the fact that they're not really looking like they're going to turn it around, I'm just avoiding them completely and going elsewhere. So earlier in the game week, Haaland was locked into my wildcard, Isak was locked in, Gordon, Son, and Palmer were all locked in earlier this week, and nothing has changed to that effect. And from there, we will move forward. So that catches you up from the earlier video this week. So Cole Palmer missed out at the weekend through illness, and so if it's just illness, I'm pretty sure that he will probably be playing against Aston Villa this weekend. And if that is the case, and we do hear that from the press conferences, Cole Palmer will be my captain for double game week 35 with vice captaincy on Son. If we're a little bit unsure as to whether or not Palmer is going to be starting that first game, then I will switch the captaincy across to Son. If we find that Palmer is out completely for game week 35, he is just going to my bench, and I will quite happily play someone off the bench in his stead, as I am building a wildcard team to bench boost in game week 37, and so my bench is going to be pretty strong, and I will be able to hold Palmer through any illness that has got him hung up or got him out of the squad. So earlier in the week, I bought Nicolas Jackson into my squad before the price rises, just in case I was going to hold him through, and going on the fact that he had scored quite a spectacular goal or great finish from a striker from the week previous, and that was enough for him to earn his way into my wildcard team early on. But having watched Chelsea play their fixture at the weekend, I was reminded exactly why I dislike Jackson. He's got Darwin's finishing, but with way less chances to shoot. Now, I also severely dislike owning any sort of stroppy players, and if you combine that with Jackson just being a yellow card magnet, I just cannot bring myself towards owning him. Even Ian Wright and Glenn Hoddle commented on last week's penalty incident, pointing to issues in the dressing room. I think that was at the halftime chat, or maybe it was the post-match chat on Sky. And we saw Chelsea switch off in the second half at about 2 or 3-0, showing that lack of mental discipline. And with Jackson's attitude on the pitch, putting undue pressure on a pretty young squad, God only knows how he is off the pitch when the cameras aren't on him in front of a massive crowd, and I suspect it's probably a lot worse. And I've just gone completely cold on Jackson and binned him out of my squad. And in his place, I have bought in Joao Pedro, who I watched in the Man City game this morning, and I thought he actually did quite well. I do not know how Pedro was not awarded a penalty in that game, as that is pretty much a penalty like 80-90% of the time that is normally awarded. If the ref had given it, I don't think VAR would have overturned it, which is what the commentators said for the match as well. But Joao Pedro comes into the team slightly cheaper at 5.2 million. He came back from injury against Brentford with a 90-minute appearance, then only saw 27 minutes against Arsenal, but that was actually only a few days in between the Brentford and Arsenal match. I think it was like 3 or 4 days, and he had just been out for 4, 5, 6 matches, which is probably about 5 or 6 calendar weeks. So 90 minutes, then a 27-minute appearance against Arsenal, and then back on as a starter against Burnley for 88 minutes. And I said to myself when I was looking at Jackson still sitting in my squad, if Pedro starts against Man City and looks semi onto it, I am binning Jackson and I am bringing Joao Pedro in, and that is exactly what happened. Came in, started the match, played 90 minutes against Man City, and actually looked pretty decent. And Brighton's fixtures are actually pretty good from an attacking point of view. They're away to Bournemouth in game week 35, who I will happily play Joao Pedro in if Cole Palmer is somehow out and not recovered from his illness. Then has Aston Villa at home in game week 36, the double in 37, which is Newcastle away, and Chelsea at home, which is, I mean, it's okay. Chelsea's not a great defence. Newcastle can have a bit of a woeful defence as well. They do have a lot of injuries at the moment. And then, of course, Manchester United receiving 30 shots per game and with no fit centre-backs, well, apart from Maguire, Casemiro playing in centre-back. I will happily play Joao Pedro in game week 38 if it does come down to the fact that whether or not he actually makes it onto the pitch. So Jackson is no longer in my squad. Joao Pedro comes in for him and currently on the bench for game week 35. The other players that were a little bit up in the air, so I did discuss Kevin De Bruyne in my video earlier this week, and I hadn't settled on whether or not I was going to bring KDB in, as I wasn't too sure about what his minutes were going to be like, but I went and had a little bit of a look at last season's data, and he actually managed to play quite a lot of 90-minute appearances and was only really rotated in and around the Champions League. Champions League matches, he played 90 minutes and 83 minutes in the semi-finals against Real Madrid, also getting 90 minutes in match week 35 against Leeds. So it was like 90, 90, 83, and then there was a little bit of rotation in the final couple of game weeks of the season. But at that point, Man City had already had the league tied up. They were already champions, and he was being preserved for the Champions League final. So I'm almost certain that KDB probably starts every Premier League match for the rest of the season. And he is in the squad and is basically the player that is going to combat Bruno Fernandes, who is basically in all of the teams that I'm seeing floating around at the moment, and I'm more than happy to have Kevin De Bruyne going up against Bruno Fernandes. Yes, there's a big price difference there. Kevin De Bruyne is a lot more expensive, but I do actually have quite a lot of money in this squad, and he is locked into the team. And he's also locked in alongside Phil Foden. So I'm going to be tripling up on the City attack. Haaland, De Bruyne, and Foden. I'm a little unsure with what I'm doing with Haaland at the moment, as of course he did miss that Brighton match fully, and we are a little bit unsure what's going on there. If he's not going to be available for this Nottingham Forest fixture, I'm going to have Alvarez on my wildcard in his place with the money in the bank to go straight back up to Haaland should I need to. It's only going to cost me 0.1 difference if I do sell Haaland to Alvarez in order to buy Haaland back, and with my proposed transfers I will have enough money to do that. So tripling up on the City attack, Haaland, De Bruyne and Foden. I think Foden plays all the matches. He's looking amazing in that City team. He's just going from strength to strength all season. Pep has done a masterclass coaching him into that central midfield role. He's involved in everything, and I just cannot go without Phil Foden. I did seriously consider having Havertz in Foden's spot. And I was flirting with that idea right up until the Haaland injury, really. Well, my uncertainty on Haaland and Gusto. I was going to start with Havertz, play him against West Ham, and then bring Phil Foden in, but I just do not see the point of avoiding this Nottingham Forest fixture, and we're just going to go with Phil Foden instead. So basically my front 8 are now completely locked in. They will not be changing apart from maybe Haaland if he is in fact injured, and Alvarez will be in his spot instead. Now, to tidy up the rest of the players that are locked in, my goalkeeper pairing is also locked in because I just do not like any of the goalkeeping options out there. I am well aware that having either Petrovic or Vicario on the bench means I will be down on one double game weeker for game week 35, but I don't think I think it's too restrictive to try and get or jam 3 Chelsea and 3 Spurs in. I mean, I haven't even got 3 Spurs in my squad here. I'm just going with Son and Vicario at the moment, and I don't actually. And I am flirting with bringing in Pedro Porro. I'm not too sure when I'm going to bring him in yet, but I'll get onto that in a sec. So it's Petrovic and Vicario, mostly for the double in game week 37. Burnley and Sheffield United as 2 of the final 3 fixtures for Spurs. I just cannot look away from that. And on the double game week where I'll be bench boosting, to have Petrovic against Forest away and Brighton away. I mean, they probably concede in both those games. Maybe they fluke a clean sheet against Nottingham Forest, but there aren't a lot of options really when it all comes down to it. And so Vicario and Petrovic are in. I think I will probably play Vicario this weekend and just hedge my bets depending on what's going on with Gusto. The problem, Gusto is one of the final spots that I will have to decide upon because of his knee ligament related issues. Anything to do with ligaments usually is a hard avoid for me. So I'll wait to hear what happens in the press conferences, and who knows, I might switch it around and put Petrovic on the pitch if I do have to drop Gusto. It's a little bit up in the air yet. But yeah, so that's the goalkeepers. Vicario in, Petrovic in. I'm super unsure who I'm going to play this weekend. I will probably end up hedging my bets when the deadline rolls around, but we'll see what comes out of the press conferences. Gabriel is also locked into the squad. He will be my only single game week player in game week 37. I have no plans to transfer him. I think I'm just going to bench boost with him on the bench away to Man United. I do not at all rate Manchester United, and I'm more than happy to play an Arsenal defender in that game. I was actually flirting with the idea of actually having Raya in as a goalkeeper for one of the either Petrovic or Vicario for quite a period of this game week as well, as I was going to try and load up on a little bit more Arsenal players, but I think I'm just going to end up with Gabriel going through. Van Hecke is in as well. This is just a punt on the double game week bench boost, really. I mean, Newcastle away and Chelsea at home. I'm not expecting clean sheets there. Maybe he gets himself up for a corner and earns a header. I am not going to be playing him at all, apart from in game week 37 as part of the bench boost. He's just in there as an enabler at 4.1 million, as about the only nailed asset that's cheap in that Brighton defence. Right, now that only leaves the 3 men on screen of Gusto, Alexander-Arnold and Dan Burn. So as I mentioned, Gusto has been out with some issues with his ligaments in his knee. I will be switching Gusto out probably if he is out this weekend. I don't fancy playing Van Hecke. off the bench away to Bournemouth. Really, I'd probably try to find an attacking defender somewhere. Defenders are few and far between though, so I might end up switching it across to someone like Dizazi if I can afford it. But I am super unsure what I'm going to do with this Gusto spot if he is out. I mean, if he's back and ready to play the Aston Villa game, then that means that the ligament issue probably isn't that severe. But if he's missing Aston Villa as well, it could be a lot more worse than I think. And I just do not want to be mucking around with transfers with Gusto with only 4 game weeks of the season remaining. And so he will probably leave my squad if he's not going to be fit for this game week. It will obviously depend very heavily on the press conferences coming out this weekend. Now, depending on Gusto and Haaland's fitness, sorry, probably not so much Gusto, but mostly Haaland's fitness, if I need to make transfers of starting with Alvarez and having to bring Haaland in either in game week 36 or for the double in game week 37, then I probably will not start with Alexander-Arnold in my squad and just give up on Liverpool altogether for the remainder of the season. I'm flirting with the idea of having him in here away to West Ham, but Pedro Porro was back in training either today or yesterday, and so I am almost certainly going to be switching across to from Alexander-Arnold across to Pedro Porro and probably playing him this game week. This is one of those ones that's a little bit up in the air. It'll kind of depend on, like, if Pedro Porro is going to miss that first game against Arsenal and it's just a single game week away to Chelsea, I think I might just end up playing Alexander-Arnold for West Ham away and then switching across to Pedro Porro in either game week 36 or game week 37. But either way, Alexander-Arnold might be here only for this West Ham fixture. And then Dan Burn is in the squad at the moment, but he is actually a placeholder for Kieran Trippier, who is meant to be back for the Burnley fixture in game week 36. So Newcastle have Sheffield United at home this week, Burnley away in 36, and then Brighton and United in the double for game week 37. Now, by game week 37, Trippier should be back. He might actually be ready for this Burnley fixture in game week 36. And I was actually hoping to have Trippier in for the Sheffield United fixture, but it does not look like he is going to make it. And so I'm probably going to start with Dan Burn in his places. I just can't avoid the Sheffield United fixture. It's just too good of a fixture for Newcastle. And so it's probably going to be Dan Burn in at the moment. But my proposed transfers, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to see on the transfer planner here, but you'll see that I've got 0.2 remaining in my squad, but the transfer planner here is actually only saying 0 million. That's because I've made some price gains across the game week, which actually might come in quite clutch. But depending on what's going to happen in the press conferences, my alternative starting player is going to be Pedro Porro here, which gives me 2.6 million in the bank, which will allow me to go from Burn to Trippier with 0.4 remaining in the bank. And depending on what's happening with Haaland, if I do switch down to Alvarez, I will need to leave 0.1 million in the bank in order to be able to buy Haaland back when he is fit. And so that means I will only have 0.3 of this 0.4 million to spend. So I've got 4.5 million for a defender in Gusto's spot should we find out that that ligament issue with his knee is a bit more severe than initially thought. But this is roughly what the team is going to look like in game week 37. So when I make the transfers, I'm not entirely sure, but I should have Trippier and Porro in my squad for game week 37. I'd ideally like to probably start with them in game week 35 if at all possible, because I don't really want to book in any transfers in case we get hit with some random injuries. I just like to set this team up and just roll it through and potentially even burn some transfers along the way, if that is the way that it does in fact roll out. But I will definitely need one transfer for Trippier before game week 37, and that's about my only proposed transfer. So this would be the bench boost squad pending gusto. I'm unsure who I'm going to go for at 4.5 million here. I've got no idea who I'm going to bring in. If any of you got any ideas out there, please let me know in the comments below. But that is basically the wildcard team locked in. So quite different to what I am seeing floating about on Twitter and YouTube. But yeah, that looks like the wildcard team that I will be running with for the run-in. So that's it for today's video. So remember to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And until next time, I will catch you again shortly. Cheers.